developer at GoDaddy. I've been there for about 18 months now. And in case, I don't know, are you guys GoDaddy customers at all? Nope, neither of you. So in case you didn't know, we are the world's largest domain registrar. We're also the world's largest DNS. So about a third of all DNS queries on the planet go through GoDaddy. And we're also the world's largest hosting company. And this is our mission. This is why I joined. We got a new CEO about almost 2 years ago, and he's kind of trying to transform the company. And that's why I'm part of this process of getting enterprise to adopt JavaScript. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I got here, what enterprise really, I think what it means, and then how we get enterprise to really embrace JavaScript. So about me, I'm a geek at heart. So I really love science. I love math. I dabbled with computers in high school, so this kind of dates me. This was the type of computer we had in high school. I learned how to flip all those switches in to get it to boot up and read the paper tape so we could play Lunar Lander. That was a lot of fun, but at the time, I didn't think that I was going to go into computers. I thought I was going to be a scientist. And so that's when I went to college, that's what I was studying. I was studying chemistry and physics. And then a couple of things happened. One is I worked in labs for a couple of summers, and I hated it. So no more science for me. The other thing is this happened. Do you guys, either of you recognize this? So this is a screenshot from the famous Apple ad where they introduced this guy. And that really changed my life, because this is when I really got into wanting to work with computers, and I started studying programming classes and things like that. It was too late for me to get a degree by then in college, so I went on later and got a master's in computer science. And one of the things that that this machine did is it gave me an appreciation of what really great software is. And so here's a bunch of words that people typically use to describe what I consider great software. But it wasn't until kind of the early 90s when I heard somebody talk about software where that person used a word that really hit home with me, and that is delicious. So that is kind of, since I've heard that, that is really how I would describe what my mission in life is to create delicious software. And the good news is that there's lots of stuff out there that I would call delicious. And here, some screens from different things. Dropbox, GitHub, different, iOS, the latest Mac software. These are all things that are really awesome. Unfortunately, there's lots of stuff out there that is not yet delicious, including some stuff from GoDaddy. This is just awful. We're working on fixing it, but right now it's still awful. Here's another thing from GoDaddy. Again, pretty awful stuff. Here's one of my pet peeves. In fact, I was just in a Twitter exchange with these guys. So I'm a frequent flyer with US Air. I live in Seattle, and GoDaddy has an office there, but the headquarters are in Scottsdale, Arizona. So about 2 or 3 times a month, I fly down there. And every time I log in with US Air and try to get my mobile boarding pass, I click that box, and they don't pre-fill my email address, even though they know it. So I have to type it in every single time. Here's a bunch of other things that are really awful. So I started thinking about, what do these things have in common, that these software experiences that I would describe as undelicious? They're all enterprise. And so that kind of got me thinking, what does it really mean? What does enterprise really mean? This guy? Yes, I'd say that is enterprise. This guy is definitely enterprise. These guys, not so much. But this guy, he's enterprise. So we kind of have an intuitive sense of what that means, but I thought a little bit more about how do you really quantify enterprise. So one aspect is size, right? You typically think of enterprise as these big things, but is that really the defining characteristic? Think of Google. Google's a really big company, and I don't think you'd call it enterprise. Google produces some pretty delicious software. So I don't think size is the defining characteristic. Another one is age, right? You think of enterprise as these old, slow, lumbering giants. but there's some companies that have been around 40+ years, and you wouldn't. They also produce some pretty delicious software. So I don't think it's age. Is it their attitude and how they embrace technology? This is where I think actually this is what I think it's about. And one of the things that I've read about is this way of quantifying companies on how mature they are with using technology. And so at the low end are companies that merely use software, right? In fact, up until 10 years ago or something, this used to be most companies. Then in the middle are companies that write their own software. But then the furthest evolved ones are ones that are really software at the core. And here are some examples to kind of really drive what this means home. So traditional car companies versus Tesla. Tesla really is software at the core. These other companies aren't. Retail, Amazon, software at the core. These other companies aren't. Uber versus taxis, Netflix versus other kind of TV entertainment things. And so this is where I begin to think this is really what enterprise means to me, is companies that do write their own software, but they're not software at the core. And this is really an issue for enterprise because there's this famous quote from Mark Andreessen that software is eating the world. And what that kind of means is that I think enterprise are getting squeezed from both ends. So from the top end, they're getting squeezed by these companies that are software at the core. Turns out they're also getting squeezed from the bottom end because smaller companies are able to leverage SaaS applications and things like that to use really delicious software in their things. And so I think this is kind of an existential crisis for enterprise, that they need to respond to this. And so I think the answer is to get enterprise really to write delicious software. And that's a real challenge because if you look at, this is kind of how I see the landscape for enterprise today. And that's a lot of stuff that they have to do. Like if you look at on the server side, like typically you'll be either a Java shop or a .NET shop. Of course, some companies like GoDaddy do both. And it just makes it really hard to become an expert in something. And so you're spending so much time and your developer pool is diluted because you have to deal with all these different technologies. Now, the opportunity is the fact that JavaScript is everywhere here. And so if we get enterprise to focus on JavaScript, you can have a much smaller set of talent. You don't have to have as many skills, and therefore you can develop that talent further and get better at writing delicious software. Now, so that's, I think, is the answer, is to really embrace JavaScript to help you along that path. Now, there are some issues there, and most of those have to do with perceptions or attitudes of companies towards JavaScript. And some would call these kind of myths. So, for example, it's just a toy language, right? That's a well-known thing. And I think the answer to that is any language in which you can implement the Y Combinator is not a toy language. And I think, so JavaScript, we've discovered, when people first started using it, really people just did little animations on pages, and they didn't really understand how to use it. But if you really understand the power of prototypal inheritance and the power of higher order functions, you can understand that this is a very, very powerful language. Another common myth is that it only works in the browser. As I demonstrated on the previous slide, we know that's not true. Like, thanks to Node, it's really very powerful on the server. And there are efforts where it's absolutely possible to write high-quality applications on mobile as well, thanks to things like PhoneGap and also Appcelerator Titanium. Another thing, it's too slow, right? That was another thing. And that probably was true, but there have been such incredible advances, primarily thanks to the Google V8 engine, where the performance is pretty amazing. I saw a stat the other day that on the new iPhone 6, the Sun Spider benchmark runs faster than it did on a 2010 MacBook Pro, which is pretty amazing. So that's both hardware and software advances. So JavaScript definitely not too slow for most things. Yes, obviously there are certain things where you still need to use compiled languages or some other type of software. But that used to be true when people were claiming C is too slow. You have to write it in assembly, right? So now we're at a point where for 95% or 99% of things, JavaScript is just fine. This is a big one, especially, and you'll get this actually. Most of these other things, developers will understand, but this is one where you actually have to, I don't know if fight is the right word, but you have to convince your Java and C# developers that they can be productive in a dynamically typed language. And it really comes down to a question of getting used to a world where you don't have the compiler giving you that security blanket that found your errors. And so here, again, there's some interesting evidence. There was a talk that somebody did, and you can find it on Vimeo, where he actually did some science. He collected data. He looked at a bunch of open source projects on GitHub, and he looked at the issues that were found on those projects. And these were for dynamically typed languages like Python, Ruby, JavaScript, things like that. And what he found is that 2% of the issues were type-related errors. So only 2% of the issues would have been found by a compiler. So the other thing that's happened is the whole rise of testing and TDD. And so that, I think, is the security blanket that you really need. Instead of the compiler telling you that there are errors, because it only finds type errors, which are only 2% of them, you really want testing to find your errors. And in that case, using a dynamically typed language is totally fine. And in fact, you get so many benefits out of a dynamically typed language that you end up producing higher quality software faster. So I think to kind of summarize, I think enterprise is facing an existential crisis because getting squeezed from both ends with software. And I think the way out of that is for enterprise to get to a point where they can create delicious software, and the way to do that is by embracing JavaScript. So this is my new version. Instead of the Mac, it's JavaScript is the answer. Thank you. If you have any questions. So, yeah, so we are in the process of transitioning a lot of things away from .NET and from Java to Node. I think I mentioned one of the big things is getting the developers comfortable with that. The other is, as with any large company where you have a lot of existing software, it's a challenge moving the company away from existing systems that work to new systems. So you have to kind of do it piecemeal and make sure you fit in. Yeah, well, sometimes it's not that it's working. There are some things that are working, but one of the big challenges is you want to constantly be adding new capabilities and features. And so the ability to move quicker, to use, so here was another example that I read about. I think it was at LinkedIn. LinkedIn switched their front ends from Java to Node, and I think they said they were able to get the same performance from like some ridiculously small percentage of machines. I think I'm thinking it's 1/10 of the machines, right? So that's a significant cost savings because it not only it's less hardware to buy, but it's also less hardware to manage and operate. So those are other things that we're getting out of them, out of switching to Node. Deployment becomes easier, right? Because you can use more modern systems. So there are lots of benefits you get out of moving to more dynamic systems and JavaScript in particular. Another, we talked, so Node is valuable on the server. On mobile, it's another thing, right? So right now, GoDaddy has some mobile applications, and they've been built natively, which means we have completely separate code bases for Android and for iOS. And we are moving over to a JavaScript-based solution where we can share a single code base, which means we get to deploy fewer developers and make progress more quickly and deliver features to our customers more quickly.
What are you doing about, because the organization is obviously geared towards Java, and we have a lot of employees that are obviously very, very good at Java, very, very good at .NET, getting that transition over.
Yeah, so I'm just going to, for the camera, the question is, how do you deal with an existing employee base that has been trained and is very good at either Java or .NET and getting them over to JavaScript? And yeah, that's a challenge. I think the steps you have to go through is first make it very clear that you are making that transition, that and provide all the rationale to them. And then there are some people that will be excited by that. There are some that are really excited about learning. Like, many developers really thrive on learning new technologies, and so they think this is a great thing that they get to learn these new things. Others are not that enthused, and in a lot of cases they will end up leaving. So it is a potential painful experience for some people and for the organization, but for the most part we found that that the good developers are the ones that always want to be learning, and they're excited about a transition like this.
Can we say that Java exists since ages, but like Node.js is it enough mature to go on production?
Is Node.js mature enough to go in production? Yeah, so I think my answer is absolutely. There are lots of companies that are running Node.js in production today, including GoDaddy. It depends on what you want to use it for. So I'd say primarily on the front-end servers. Although you could do it, writing a billing system, backend system in Node.js may not be the right thing, right? That may be something where you want to be a little more cautious. But for front-end things like services that talk directly to the network, Node is awesome at that. So I think it's definitely mature enough, and you can get things up and running really quickly. So I think, yes, definitely.
And the steps to transition over, do you drop down analogies or approaches like, okay, in the past we do profiling in Java and we get all the answers like this. How do we do profiling? Do you do steps like that?
So the question is, how do you do profiling or debugging, things like that, to make sure that you're...
Yeah, to convince, existing employees.
Yeah, so there are tools that are available for Node.js to do that. They're probably not quite as mature as they are for Java. One of the tools that we use is, I don't know if you've heard of a company called New Relic. So they have a service that you can use to monitor your Node.js applications, and we found that really, really helpful, and it gives us a lot of information about what is happening in our application. So that is one of the things that we can do. Great. All right, thank you very much, guys.